Agreements, we're all in this together. Nobody has an answer. It's very complicated. We're only talking about locally, and it's hard enough that way, but globally it's even way more complicated than that. So community agreements, real basic, shared space. Don't hog the mic, don't hog the time, and let's allow each other to share our opinions. Everybody's opinion matters. Everybody's life experience has value. We don't have to agree on everything. Even if we disagree, I'd rather have your opinion than hear no opinion. Because even in our disagreement, you might give me a point of view that I never considered, because you have a different life experience, right? So that's about it. Here's some questions that we can consider, but it's open mic time. Anybody want to have comments?
I feel like I'm pretty loud by myself.
Go ahead.
So something that was in my head since you guys were talking about monarch butterfly populations. I've been getting really into native plants and taking like a native plant course right now. And something I discovered recently is that moths actually do like 70% of pollination. Yeah, moth populations are hugely important. So keeping that in mind, I'm trying to plant native plants, and I'm trying to keep the moths in mind. What do they like to sip on?
MOTH moths?
Yeah.
Depressed moths. Yeah, I'm not a moth expert. I don't know, Peter.
There are a lot of plants that are night blooming, and moths are attracted. And those plants usually have a really strong sweet odor, and those are the plants that are specific to certain moths. But they also pollinate other plants too, but primarily night blooming plants, and there are actually quite a few of them.
I love it. I love it. I'm learning so much, and I feel like everything I'm learning is reaffirming the fact that we are from nature, and nature is our food, our home, that there's so much power in this knowledge. So, yeah, thank you.
By the way, the woman that was she'll be at the next one. She's an expert on native plants. I mean, and it's all oral. So much so I didn't realize she was at the what's the name of the museum again? The Huntington Library, right? They've got the gardens there, right? Well, primarily native plants. She wrote a book on how those native plants are used. That's how our knowledge is. She's just absolutely incredible. Yeah.
Can't wait to catch that.
Do you remember the name of the website? Native Roots?
Native roots, right?
No, it was another word.
I can't remember.
Any other feedback and comments? Anybody?
So thank you both. Really interesting to think about. You went through the entire continent, and I think that's really what we need. Like you were saying, this should be something that we all know. And like you said, thankfully now we're discussing it here. Thanks to Midnight Books and Gabe and this incredible space. And it's something that we need to, keep on going. I feel like this is amazing, just the whole process of thinking about it, and that's why we should continue to support. So I guess I wanted to say, make sure you're supporting Midnight Books, eh? Get a book if you can at the end, yes. But because we want to keep this going. But I was really personally intrigued by the first part where we were going over the different groups in Mexico. I know I am Mexican, like I was born over there, and I'm from the neighboring group, the Puripechas. So I think it's just fascinating that, I think, since I was born there and I went in elementary school there, it's just so different. There is more respect for the indigenous heritage of Mexico than there certainly is here for the indigenous people here. And in Mexico, I think we get a lot more experience with it and a lot more affiliations with it. And it's so sad to me that, say, people from Mexican heritage, but from any country, maybe they've been here for several generations, they don't know. And so I think we have to do some type of better, some type of research, right? Like, where are we coming from? Because I think that's, what you were saying at the beginning. It's like, how do we fix all these problems that we have? Well, part of it is understanding where we're coming from, so that we can, think about how the struggle has been going on for hundreds, thousands of years, and how we are now coming into it. And I'm just fascinated by, all of the quote immigrants, say from Mexico, that are here. Where are we from Mexico from? And like, what is that history, and how do we inform our current efforts? So I would love to, if you have any suggestions, just researching that stuff.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
one
know.
of the things that Teresa is involved in, and along with a bunch of other Indians. But let me just suggest something to you. That in 1950s, late 1950s and early 1960s, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had a real problem. They had to give back money they'd been stealing, right? And how they were going to do that, they had to determine who was Native American, right, on this side of the border. How to do that, and they finally determined the genealogy, ultimately reducing the blood, right? So who had the most pure blood in the United States, right? Guess what? They determined that the highest percentage of Native American blood in the United States was Mexican Americans. Mexican Americans. The mestizaje is real. The next group that had a high percentage of Native American blood was Navajo, because they tend not to marry outside of Navajo. They do have rules against incest, but it's not blood. It is. It has to do with which group you belong to in Navajo. In Navajo, there's different groups, and if you can't marry within your own group, and that's called incest to them. But it doesn't have anything to do with consanguinity. There are other groups that are high, but none of them come close to what Mexican Americans came to. So they were caught with a real problem, a very, very serious problem. And by the way, Taiji just showed me some recent research. What university was it from?
Which one?
The one that talks about that Native Americans, the highest percentage of Native Americans in the United States.
Right, it was actually a business site. It was like...
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, it was interesting. The one that had the Mexican indigenous one, right? We had to have the conversation about...
Again, it's for lack of a better term, I'll use the term Latin Americans that have moved to the United States are the highest percentage of native blood.
Yeah. So if I had a Navajo, they had this Mexican / indigenous mestizo mixture, which would include Chicanos, but it also included, in other words, it included like Mexican with indigenous lineage that were trapped on this side of the border after annexation, right? And then, but it also included other indigenous people. So that big mixed block of people was the highest number of.
It gets very complicated, because people recognize themselves in different ways. Like people from a lot of the Southwest they were there forever. They do not recognize themselves as Mexican Americans. They're from the Southwest, and they were always there. And it's true, there were no borders at one time. On the other hand, there's another problem, because when the Spaniards invaded the Southwest, right, they fought with local Indians, right, and they resisted them. The Indians did resist them. So there's always been animosity between a lot of Southwestern nations and Mexicans. So it gets really, really deep and complicated. So post-colonial impositions are heavy, really heavy.
Hi, great lecture. I noticed that some people, when they want to gaslight indigenous people, and this includes some Asians, they're going to bring up that Bering Strait theory. How do you respond to it?
Me?
Anybody, because you Peter, or you Taiji.
Anybody, let other people. Me and Peter spoke too much. Other people can speak.
Okay.
How did they say it? Go ahead, give me a shot.
I guess kind of adding to that question is that when we because we categorize people, and then there was the category that's the Asian American Pacific Islander. But then in my mind it's the Pacific Islanders also their land is more occupied, and we talk about all of these oh Lord, these like we need to disaggregate like the data, even like within like Asian Americans, there are like so many differences. Also like Pacific Islanders being so different from Asian Americans, and then it's like a whole thing. So I guess just like add to that question, like how do we respond and how do we make sense of all of this mess?
I don't think anybody has answers. I mean, that's the whole problem. You know what I mean? That's what we're trying to do. Like John and I were talking about, this affirmative action stuff. I mean, Asian Americans, whatever the hell that is, and my contention is nobody knows what the hell that is. I mean, I could fit into that category, but I'm pretty damn sure whoever wrote that article doesn't know who I am. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where most Bangla people live. I don't know the genesis of why there's so many in New York City. You know what I mean? Like, why is Cambodia town in Long Beach still the largest Khmer population outside of Cambodia? Who understands that, right? When we had the Code Pink event, right? And we were talking about a particular sector of Chinese in San Gabriel Valley. That's only one sector of, we were talking about post-1965 immigrants, but there's a whole nother slew of Taiwanese. There's Cantonese that go all the way back to the mid-1800s, right? There's, you know what I mean? So it's like, I think that we need to start investigating things more.
Yeah, I might say real quick. Why did I go? No, I was just going to say there's something that was developed, a concept called the brother-stranger syndrome, which kind of explains how people reject accepting other people. The brother-stranger syndrome basically says that if you're my people, I accept you, but other people are not. So that's almost universal. It had a very special meaning within Native Americans here, and it probably did in other countries too. In Africa, it could be pretty bloody, but it exists everywhere.
I guess, having grown up in like the anti-imperialist Korean left, like grew up like my whole family, when we think about expelling US from Korea, we're still assuming the US will exist. And I was wondering if we could change that messaging because our thing is like, get out of Korea, leave us alone. But maybe if centering indigenous voices means the US straight up like, get out, like, don't exist anymore. So I was wondering if there's ways to continue the conversation to help bridge the anti-imperialist activism overseas with the conversations having here.
Yeah. The Okinawan people have the same problem.
Yeah.
And they're really resisting too.
Yeah.
And this is happening everywhere.
I don't know, sort of a straw poll question regarding sovereignty. Okay, so, and this has already sort of been decided, but I'm just going to theoretical. Like, let's say there's an effort to organize a labor union at an Indian casino. And let's say the casino management say, we don't want the labor union here, we're declaring our sovereignty is a lot stronger than you think it is, and we want to kick the labor union out of here. What's the position to take as a left-wing, red kind of person? Just wondering. So, I don't know.
Isn't it fun that we're coming up with more questions than answers? Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of the process, right?
Yeah.
Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Oh, I actually have a question.
Oh,
No, I mean, like, in relation to what was occurring right here and what y'all brought up earlier as far as, like, how you can't really apply, like, white supremacist ideology, whether it's, like, with capitalism or, like, certain forms of ML, because, like, so what you brought up kind of reminds me, have y'all heard of this person called Twin Rabbit? There's, like, this podcast, but they were kind of, are you familiar with it?
I've heard of it, but I haven't.
Oh, okay. He kind of had an interesting breakdown as far as like what y'all brought up as far as like how the Europeans co-opted a lot of indigenous cultures, and then like that's how he came with an old savage, and then for some reason it could kind of made me think about like, do y'all ever think about how like the whole concept of like socialism, like from like a European standpoint, was like a misinterpretation of like what indigenous practices were and stuff. And then so what y'all are trying to present is what y'all are trying to present is like, if we're trying to explore like revolution, we should try to go back to what our culture would be, right? So for y'all, it'd be like indigenous. What that mean for like Asian people, like for myself, would be like re-exploring Taoism or Buddhism? Or, yeah,
That's up to you. I mean, I personally feel like
yeah,
this whole thing about, how they say if you're gonna make, for example, socialism, it has to be based on the conditions of where you live, right?
Yeah.
Every country is different. I mean, we're not gonna have a Bolshevik revolution
Yeah.
in the United States. I mean, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, sorry. Some people might try, but.
Yeah,
There are people
Well,
that try, right? Or it's not gonna be like China.
yeah, you can't have a mouth revolution.
There's 5 million
in the US.
opinions about China right now, but it's like, we're not in a position to really say. I mean, and I say around the Asian American thing, John and I were talking about, we should just go around to what Rodolfo was saying, Rodolfo. Like, we need to just start interviewing our people. Like, who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here? What's your family's background? And just start doing that kind of research. Go back to Mexico and ask,
Yeah,
about the history.
and your identity is dependent on who you identify with. That's who your identity is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I just wanted to go back to a question. Because, just so I'm understanding, so is there so people are saying that they're not anti-indigenous because they have shared genetics? Is that what's happening?
No, it's more like when indigenous people, I notice, and sorry, Rodolfo, okay. So I notice in social media forums, we talk, if somebody brings about the indigenous people, some, either a white person is gonna say oh, well, your people came here from the Bering Strait. You people came here from Asia, so you're, so I guess they're trying to say, well, you're not even the first people. You're not the people of this land. You're not the people of Turtle Island, and it's just so much gaslighting. And then I just noticed an Asian Jew that I know, and I want to talk to him about it, he mentioned the Bering Strait theory, and I just want to tell him, I've heard of a lot of other theories saying that Native, that the indigenous were always here, or they were here a lot earlier than you think they were, But it seems like for some reason the Bering Strait theory seems to stick, even though I think there's been other theories unearthed since then. Am I correct?
They talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, but for some reason the Bering Strait one is sticking. But I do know other indigenous activists who are going to point out, no, we have a lot of other evidence pointing the indigenous people were here a lot earlier. And not only that, if you notice, I've noticed a lot of indigenous people don't look anything like Asians, So, all you have to do is just take a little trip to Mexico and you're going to notice it, You'll also notice some other things. I used to live up in Northern California, and they were talking about the indigenous people that used to live up there and that they suddenly so-called disappeared. And they were talking about their practices like cooking outdoors and that sort of thing. And they were explaining it to this Mexican lady who, she was from Mexico, and she was hearing, she got really happy. She goes, oh wow, we do that too. We still do that back on the ranch, And it's so it's do you know what this means? Come on, it's kind of obvious. It's obvious the indigenous people were always here. Those indigenous practices, like you said, disappeared and died out. They're still being used in Mexico, and they're still being used, I don't know, it's we're always taught oh, these indigenous people just disappeared. And it's maybe they just kept things on the low. I don't know. And they're still doing it, they're still doing their thing, and do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right. I would have a way to counter it if that comes up.
Pass the mic.
Oh, sorry. I'm extremely Korean, but this is how I would counter it. It's Koreans migrated from Kazakhstan through Siberia and Mongolia to Korea. So, but we would not call ourselves Kazakh culture. We are Koreans, So I think
Wow. Okay.
yeah, I think migration is, unless you're literally from Kazakhstan, you will have some sort of history of migration and cultures changing. So if people are literally because you migrated from somewhere, you're from there. I think that makes no sense, because then I would have to say I'm Kazakhstan. Like,
Yeah.
We're actually all African here.
Right. Yeah. Oldest human, sub-Saharan originally, it's the oldest one we found so far.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like the question is like that important. I think
Yeah.
indigenous people just being such caregivers and there being no history of them genociding of peoples when they got here, you know, like I think the colonial method was really something that was really unique, and you know the uniqueness of the indigenous people in preserving the paradise that you know the Americas is more significant than you know what happened when they came and if they came or
Yeah,
whatever.
thank you.
Just want to put that out.
Can I go back? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I want to go back to John's question real quick. It's, you brought it up, it's really complex because, again, the post-colonial system has created a big divide between traditional Native Americans and the casino people. There's battles going on. I knew people in the Marengo casino and people from there, and they do not get along at all. They do not agree at all. So, and of course the money is controlled primarily by not Indian people. I mean, it's corporations that come in, and they do have councils of people that they want this of Native Americans. So, among the traditional peoples, there's just a lot of disagreement. So again, as a post-colonial thing, makes all those questions that you were asking very difficult.
I mean, I think the issue also, John, is what is your class stance? I'm not gonna support exploitation of workers just because you're indigenous. If you're indigenous capitalist, I'm personally, that's just my position, I'm gonna stay with my class. You know what I mean? I don't believe in exploitation of labor, right, for personal gain. So, I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm gonna side with the casino owners if there's an Australian mining company coming onto their indigenous sacred land and destroying it. I'm in complete agreement with that. But if I'm a casino worker and I can't pay my bills, that's the stance I'm gonna take, is to get paid for my labor. I don't think it's that complicated myself.
I think it actually, it is complicated.
I mean, it is, but that's my position.
You're right, but
I mean, I tend to agree with you too, however, as issues of sovereignty get larger, and hopefully they will get larger, sovereignty is going to become one of the more like base principles that you have to base your decisions on, and it's going to make it more difficult. And I think this is one of these things that like these I don't know what to call it really, but you know, it's these situations that will come up. It already has come up with the casinos, but that's considering that that's all they got, you know? That's like the only like large source of money out there. And so I do tend to be like, well, okay, you gotta look at the situation in some detail. There isn't a pat, simple answer anymore, right? So that's how I think of it right now. And I feel like it will get more complicated as there is some land being given to different tribes. However, the specific conditions of land being given is all kind of tricky too, and that's a whole other thing to talk about. But yeah, as there's more land involved, more capital involved, right, and more of a push for sovereignty, that this will become more of an issue. And I feel like as people of the left who might be involved in these situations, we have to be conscious of this and maybe not. I don't want to say be class reductionist, but don't be class reductionist. And so that's my take on it.
What about class reductions? Order breakdown again? Sorry.
That you would say, okay, class will override sovereignty issues.
Oh, yeah,
Class
yeah.
will override, like various indigenous issues that will come up, whether it could be like membership in, tribe or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Or if there's even like, say a casino has some kind of affirmative action type program for their own people.
Yeah.
I mean, shouldn't they be able to do that?
Okay.
Right?
Well, I think what John is bringing up is the national question here in the US.
Oh,
Basically is, you know, something in, and it's probably a Twitter thing, but patriotic socialist. Isn't this the thing? I mean, they are basically what they call themselves communists. But yeah, but what they're saying is basically is, you know, it's going to be communism, but it's going to be primarily by the white people on this land. So it's like saying, well, we'll have in this scenario, we'll have communists, but there still won't be any sovereignty for the indigenous people. So is that better? That's the question.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that Native Americans do have sovereignty. That's why these corporations can come in and say, hey, we see an opportunity here to make money. You got sovereignty, I can put a money-making thing in here. We'll take advantage of that sovereignty,
But
which they've done able to
but is
do.
it? Oh, sorry. But is it it's like here, right? You'll have like the business people. They can make the decisions, but what about the actual people?
Yeah, that's a whole nother problem.
So that's what I'm saying. So I'm assuming it's the same thing
Yeah.
for the indigenous nations. Is yeah, the people in League of the Casino Owners. Some of them probably are indigenous, but they are capitalist indigenous.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about the people?
Yeah.
Was anyone else on cue?
I have like a kind of practical question, but if we were doing land back here, who would we, like, what would be the organization that we're demanding, like, we give this land back to? This one? Yep.
Sorry, I actually, like, that's kind of like, I also have a question, I'm so sorry. It's kind of like add to you, like, we say land back, but then exactly, like we know it's a difficult battle to fight, but what exactly would, like, land back look like?
Like the body, the organizational body that we're like, we need to give land back to these people, and this is, they're gonna govern it now.
Yeah, and then also, like, go back to your point, like, at that point, will there still be a United States? Anyway.
They've been doing, I think in NorCal, there's been some, like, I know, like, in the news recently, they've been returning land to, like, tribes. I don't know if that's the right word.
Washington and West.
Washington and Central California area,
Oh.
land
And
has
some,
been given
and some
back.
private owners have been giving back
So,
land too.
yeah, so.
And tribes have been buying land too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
If we
especially
were
if they
to
have
do that-
casinos, yeah, they've been doing it.
If we're doing that here, who should we be directing the energy to be doing land back for reals?
You know, it's a real question, like in Washington, apparently it's conservative people who give the land back. The interesting thing about that, of course, when they give something away, it's tax-free, I mean, they get tax benefits for it, right? Peter Strauss gave a whole bunch of land, you know, that was Indian land, but he gave it to the county, I believe. Whenever wealthy people give, they get. They don't do nothing for free, right? So I'm not sure what happened up there. The rancher that gave away land here in Central California area, he actually gave it away. He gave it away. The Irvines gave away land too. Guess what? They're extremely wealthy. They don't pay any taxes, and they got more tax benefits on that. You know. So this is a real curious thing. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to add on to that. I don't know if anybody heard, there was some more recent news. A lady, she gave, I guess, and she comes from a well-to-do family too, of course. They recently gave like some of their property in Altadena back to the Tonga. Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Oh, okay. But
That's a real curious thing, because we might want to talk about that.
I don't want to talk about that.
she's a burner too, I think.
With talk around casinos and stuff, and maybe it's just some of my background in history, but had anyone thought about the exploration around like game theory in relation to like what we're exploring as far as like what we're trying to get, as far as like, okay. It's just like, have you all thought about exploring what incentives to provide in order to make any gains in relation to like incentives that the state tries to provide that seems to divide indigenous tribes, it seems, right? Relating to like casinos and like resources or whatever. So I'm not sure if that's something y'all had explored. Also in relation to like when y'all brought up about what is that? person's name, Talamuke? Did I pronounce his name right?
Tecumseh.
Comes up?
Tecumseh, okay. I'm just curious on like what has been explored around like the various strategies he has taken in creating, it was like a federation, right? Because when I was first introduced to this guy, it was from this reading from this black socialist dude, Bill Fletcher Jr. Y'all familiar with that reading from MR Online? Okay, I'll send that to y'all later, but
I know Bill Fletcher, I don't know what reading.
okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just curious of like what kind of strategy y'all explore from Talmud Gimei's.
I mean, can I just say,
Yeah.
first of all,
Uh-huh.
there's no one in this room that's gonna be the center of that conversation.
Mhm.
It's difficult.
It's not anybody in this room's place to be determining what decisions should be made for indigenous people. That's
Oh, yeah.
my opinion.
Mhm.
So I'm not gonna really speculate. I mean, they need to figure out how to get together. I mean, I'm advocating that indigenous people be at the front of the table for land management, because in their culture, they have the practices that I believe are most consistent with the interests of the land itself. But I'm not in a position to determine specifically which tribes are at the front of the table, or whether it's gonna be a collection of various tribes in a region, and how that's gonna be worked out. But it's not, I think that's a process that has to happen amongst indigenous people,
Mhm.
you know.
Let me just say real quickly that Teresa, the woman that was gonna be here, Rachel's her name, she, one of the reasons she was coming, because she stepped back, she's kind of put herself out of the public light for a while, for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons she wants to come to speak to us is because she recognizes spirit. Because she says, she feels there's a real movement going on among people who think the way she does. And she sees us as a real hopeful group. So she wants to come and talk to us all and let her know her wisdom. Which is, we know it already. We know it, that whole idea is kind of disappeared among us, the erasure.
Can I just ask a real question? Because, you know, like, it's really easy to get in these abstracts. And John, I didn't mean to say that your question was, I didn't mean to denigrate it, because it is very complex, you know what I mean? But I think I was just trying to speak personally that we don't have the answers, right? And so I think it's great that everybody's coming with questions, because that's part of the process, you know what I mean, right? Like, we're coming with the questions because we're grappling with how to advance things, and we don't have to have the answers right now, right? But I just wanted to clarify, when it comes to specific questions about the indigenous people, they have to address for themselves. We're not the ones that address it for them. That's-
What was on that part?
We're not the people that address those questions for indigenous people,
Oh yeah.
okay?
Yeah, just a little bit on the land back, and maybe maybe something that can kind of think about. I think like indigenous caregivers of the land that have a lot of knowledge of plant life, those are the people we should be looking towards when thinking about land back. And there is some tribal, we can, the low income ones, I think would be really important to health and stuff. That's just something I was thinking. Maybe a kind of a comment question is kind of on what you were talking about, how Tecumseh was able to unite tribes and stuff, and how the identity of the Chicano was kind of like a thing where we can kind of have a holistic identity, where it did have a con to it was that you kind of erase the cultures of the indigenous peoples and their traditions by taking on that kind of larger identity. But in the positive form, it does kind of help with bringing more people into a battle where maybe an indigenous tribe has an issue and can't fight their battle, but if they unite with other tribes, it's much easier. And maybe it could just be a movement without having it be an identity, and you can keep your indigenous identity, but there is some kind of ebb and flow, cons and pros to these things that I kind of see. Some people will be like, no, don't call yourself Mexican, we're indigenous, and And then I think of like the Spaniard in Mexico City that's very like fair skinned. I'm like, well, I don't want them calling themselves indigenous. You know? And so you know, it can get more complicated than just, you know, doing what you want.
Can I just ground it a little bit, like some of these questions? Like, what is this decolonization process? I know I've learned a lot through this process, and you know, I hope to keep studying. But can I ask, like, how people see, or did you come up with any more ideas about how you can engage in decolonization practice? I know you talked about the moss and, you know, the plants and things like that, but can other people that haven't spoken can share, maybe? Aaron?
What am I talking about? How do you decolonize yourself?
How do I decolonize myself?
Or
I don't know, dude.
Or your work, or what, anything,
Huh?
anything, your work or anything.
Oh, my work? Well, I spend way too much time than I'm supposed to on like pre-Columbian America. I'm supposed to do like 3 days, and this past year I did 2 weeks. Even that wasn't enough. I had to speed up at the end. And then like throughout, like I go in deep on teaching like manifest destiny, and like teaching like Native American genocide was in like just like one fell swoop. It's like over hundreds of years, like little battles by little battles by little battles. And then at the end of the year, I kind of like skip the 90s to like now, and kind of like, well, the 90s to like 2015-ish, and I start like do like the past 10 years, and then I talk about like, you know, BLM and then like land back and stuff like that to the students, because that's like somewhat relatable to them since they're like high schoolers. It's been going on like since they've been in elementary school, and I have conversations about how like genocide's still happening today, and how like we talk about like, oh, these people like they're gone and they're dead, but they're like not, they're still here. And that's what I try to do, but it's hard. It takes a lot of scaffolding, because, you know, we don't really like talk about it any other time, and we don't talk about it in like elementary or middle school. You're lucky if you get into high school. Some people scratch the surface in college. So it's difficult.
Hi, so, you know, I'm not the most knowledgeable person about how to decolonize myself, but one thing that just blows my mind is, you know, like, okay, human manifest destiny, I mean, it was a real thing, but it just, you know, I just find it hard the way that people thought that way, and it's just, it's like, no, get that hell out of here. Yeah, so, you know, I talk to people, you know, I talk to relatives and just different people. I heard some people say things like, well, why do you talk about that? All that was a long time ago, it's history, and, you know, you just gotta accept it. And I tried to make them understand it. Well, yeah, all the things were a long time ago, but they're important, and you know, those things shape the way of how things kind of are now, and a lot of things haven't changed. There's still people with that kind of that mentality is still in our society, in our civilization, and people out there still think that way, who think it's okay to overrule people and to you know, control people in one manner or another, and it just really upsets me when I meet people who think that way. So I try not to get in arguments, but I try to say to them, try to find out why they're pointing to why they think that way, why they feel that way, and then if I can't convince them, I tell them, no, you're wrong. So kind of. Yeah, so it's all fascinating to me. But what do I do to try to decolonize myself, or what I do? Well, number one, I think that one best thing we can all do is educate ourselves, and I know I certainly could use a lot more education. I don't know, I guess I just try to, I just try not to adhere to every single rule out there, especially if I feel it's a rule that's just, that I know it's just me, because every environment or this work, whatever, has their rules, and so I just don't put up with things if people tell me my views are wrong, and then I like to tell you, well, explain to me why. I like to have you explain things to me, not just say that's the way it is. You know, so I don't have an answer for everything, but I try to explain myself. I like that. So that's it.
Thank you. So, I'm going to try to say this in a way that makes sense. I think what's interesting about the national question within the context of a white supremacist settler colony like the United States is that it's also a question of internationalism. So, my orientation towards the Tongva Nation, for example, is an internationalist orientation because I'm not a member of the Tongva Nation. So, it's important, I think, to keep that internationalist frame in mind when addressing the national question and how to act in solidarity with decolonization in a place like the United States. Because we have to remember, and I think you alluded to this earlier, that the United States is the enemy, right? And there's going to be a lot of infiltrators, liberals or red-brown fascists, who try to redeem the United States. And it's not redeemable. So I think that in terms of how do we orient ourselves towards decolonization, how do we contribute to it, how do we frame the national question, I think keeping in mind this internationalist framework is important. I don't mean to be flippant and say like the answer is revolution, but you know, it's just an important frame, I think, to keep in mind.
Can I actually ask a clarifying question for you, and then also you? With what you were explaining as far as like how you decolonize, were you giving an example? Were you giving an example, providing an example around like how you have like unpacked ways of communication? Is that what you were trying to provide earlier, as far as like ways you decolonize?
Something like that, but
Okay.
how do you mean, like, with,
Just the way, like, how you, when, like, the way you try to comprehend when a person's communicating with you and, like, whenever there's a disagreement and stuff. Was that what you're trying to present, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just, I mean, you know, of course, when I'm talking to someone about, what we're talking about, like, history, or the history of state, or country, or, you know, Americas, but I just get upset if I do hear somebody say something that doesn't sound factual to me, or I just don't agree with it. I mean, just explain yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone can explain themselves. Some people just say things and they don't know what they're talking about. That's why I said I tend to say a lot about things that I don't know a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
I said I still have a lot to be educated about, and you know, you don't know about it, don't say it, don't talk about it. It is, yeah.
So it sounds like you're trying to come from a place of always trying to learn and grow, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. And then with, I had a question, like, what is your definition of internationalist?
Solidarity across national lines. So maintaining support for or solidarity with other national struggles. So for example, interconnections between settler colonialism in the United States and settler colonialism in Palestine, and recognizing that those are both parts of the same project, and so the United States and Israel are the same colonial aggressor in a lot of ways. So that's what I mean by internationalism, is maintaining support for revolutionary struggles across national boundaries.
If I could maybe add to that a little bit and just add to the general conversation here and some of the discussions going on. A really fantastic resource that I recommend is the Red Nations book, The Red Deal, which talks a lot about land back, indigenous sovereignty, etc., through this kind of internationalist perspective. And so to get to your question earlier, they actually define land back as basically anti-imperialism on a global scale. So they say land back is about indigenous sovereignty here in quote-unquote domestic territory in North America, but it's also about ending US militarism in Okinawa, in Guam, in Hawaii, in South Korea, various places. So that's how I also like to think of indigenous sovereignty, through this kind of internationalist perspective, an anti-imperialist perspective, where if we're supporting anti-imperialist struggles in places like Palestine, in places like Hawaii, we're at the same time supporting land back in places like Southern California. It's all interconnected, and kind of taking down US imperialism elsewhere weakens, the structures of US imperialism here as well. And also resources for more local things, I guess, because I heard that question raised. There are various kind of indigenous land trusts in Southern California that are in early formations. There's one called the Ahashiman Conservancy, Ahashiman people being just south of Tongva territory. I'm also repping Protect Pavunga, which is on the campus at Cal State Long Beach. Check out friendsofpavunga.org.
It's really complicated.
So there are some various kind of small places, small things that are still forming, but places and organizations to get involved with.
It's also, I have
JD had a
a
thought.
practical question. I have comrades who live on reservation. Does that is it accurate for their struggle to be land back if they are on a reservation? Because they don't have sovereignty, autonomy, because the United States is all around them. So I was wondering if just language-wise, is it accurate to say their struggle is still land back? Because land,
Most of them aren't even on their original lands. Most of them have been even
Yeah.
moved from there, so it's not really like they have their land.
Well, they have been given reservations, and they do have sovereignty on those reservations with certain limitations.
yeah.
For example, if somebody outside of the reservation commits a crime,
Right.
guess what?
They don't.
The legal jurisdiction of the people on the reservation don't have priority. The settler colonial system still has a legal priority. So it's kind of like, is it really sovereignty? You know what I mean? It's not really sovereignty to me, but it's a good question.
US laws are opportunistic.
I just want to add on to that. I remember speaking to somebody at Standing Rock, and they referred to reservations as POW camps.
Yeah.
JD has a.
Well, just on the word, on decolonizing, and not a criticism, but just usually when I hear the word, I hear a lot of internal and knowledge acquiring, and which are abstract, but a lot of identity stuff is abstract. But just how sometimes I feel we lack the materialist part, where by identifying that we're living urban lives, as in compared to maybe a pastoral or a I guess indigenous way of life, which is living off the land, and how sometimes we don't make that connection in that way, and how our everyday choices of maybe even not going for a plastic bottle and refilling your water bottle, it's something very mundane, and a lot of people will say, your consumer choices are not, something that makes you, revolutionary or whatever, but they still matter, and a lot of, our materialist actions are also, something that we should recognize and understand, kind of maybe not a goal as in going back to indigenous way of life, but as in understanding that is a goal, as in living closer with nature.
I just wanted to go back to what you said. I really liked what you all said here. When you mentioned how Palestine, free Palestine, there's a famous, I won't say his name, but there's a famous kind of left YouTuber who's very vocal about free Palestine. And he doesn't think Israel should exist, give them their land back. So somebody asked, does that mean you support land back in the United States? And he went, oh, no, that's different.
Wow.
Yeah, so the question is, how is that different, right?
Yeah.
So it keeps going back to maybe the United States just shouldn't exist, because we all agree, Palestine should be free, right, from the river to the sea, so why would it be different here,
Should I just mention quickly? So this isn't like that serious, but I did wonder, so there's land, I had a question for you. You had said there's land trusts that are forming. And are there a lot, or is it like?
I guess.
Yeah.
There are a few, and I think part of the issue that currently exists is that they're all separate from each other, even in the same relatively small geographical region, and they're largely kind of focused on individual sites still. So of course that's really important, but it's not necessarily like a national liberation struggle. It's very much about kind of individual sites. So like the Ahashiman Conservancy is about some wetlands areas in Orange County. Pavunga is about one site on the campus of Cal State Long Beach. Yeah. So there are seeds, I guess, and it's kind of going to be interesting to see how they develop or not going forward.
Do they have like sovereignty though, like their own governance in it?
That's a really difficult question because they are not federally recognized, at least.
That's right.
And I don't even know what their state recognition is. I think they might have state recognition, but I think the kind of general theme that we've been talking about is that the sovereignty that a lot of nations do have, even like the Navajo Nation and how large it is, it's not necessary. It's still not an answer to the national question because it's a limited form of sovereignty. So the reservations are not an answer to the national question. It's kind of a solution that has been handed to them by the U.S. government.
Can I interject for a second? Taiji wanted to do this. I hate to really get into it, but you have to be very careful when you're talking about these areas. When you mention Tongva and some of these other areas that are being created, they're being created by people that usually have a special interest. Like Tongva is not a traditional name. That was created by academics who got a certain things out of it. So there's real problems with any of these places that are being created, and they're usually private nonprofits, which should give you a clue right away. So you have to be very careful because there are very difficult things, and again, this is a post-colonial thing, and I don't really want to get into it. We may get into it in other meetings. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Terry will talk about it.
So I just wanted to, I totally resonate with that comment, and I mean, in the whole discussion, I think that, like for me, the U.S. should definitely not exist. To me, it's always, say the border is a constant source of just psychological, like terrorism, for stress for me. Like if I go to Mexico and I come back, I'm always afraid, maybe because of all my political activity, maybe they won't let me back. And of course, families can't visit each other and all this stuff, so it's horrible. So I would agree with that, but and the question of, the phrase, quote, land back, I'm struggling again with, if I have any indigenous experience, it's in Mexico, and over there people are generally, some groups I think are pushing, or individuals and some groups do push for the idea of having their own land, but overwhelmingly I don't think that's the main thrust. And I think that has to do with the history of how the Mexican state and people have kind of developed from the different indigenous nations. There's kind of like a broader identity of, yes, certainly Mexicanos. So over there, it's really the lines between, there's an emphasis on flowing within, especially central Mexico. So I don't think that it, like I said, I'm from the Purepecha, if you want to get technical. So I don't think that the Purepecha are pushing for land back in any way. So I think it's interesting. I wonder, like, should the land, perhaps especially in some cases, be owned by some things like nonprofits, or should it just be declared no one owns the land? And maybe that's a little bit too far, but no borders would be kind of the conditions from the maps from before.
The ejidos were traditional lands granted by Mexico, you know that, and the Zapatista, and the Zapatista movement advocated that. Those were Native American lands. So, and they still advocate for it, so people do.
Right.
But that's a very traditional and very long
Exactly.
history of that too.
Yes. Yeah, exactly, that's what I had in mind, like, so some groups definitely do. I'm just pointing out that I don't think that, at least in Mexico, the vast majority of groups, I don't think they do.
Yeah.
I love that line of questioning and what you're getting into. And I think it might be important to note that reservations only exist in the United States and Canada.
Yes.
And other places, the people they stayed in their land. Places that could be defended or that the colonists didn't want, they're still there. So that's kind of important to think about, but I love the idea that it's not necessarily about the land itself, or, I mean, we're all gonna be affected by how we decide to come together, how we govern, what agreements we have. So I think it's important for us to all consider this and how we can just live right and sustainably with each other and with the earth.
Okay, it's like we're at 2 hours, so probably want to wrap it up. I did want to offer the question of, we cited many actual struggles going on right now. Have people in this room done anything to connect with those actual struggles right now? And is there any ideas about how we can start lifting those fights up, Nora?
Me? Yeah, I was thinking about around, in relation to what this person had just shared earlier, in like transforming the legacy of colonization and patriarchy that indigenous ancestors are calling us to do. I feel like past several years I've had the privilege of connecting with a lot of Viet queer comrades that have helped process and further understand what true, or quote unquote true Viet person can exist as, based on what I've learned from them. And in relation to that, I feel like the involvement with this Southeast Asian men's masculine healing group called Man Forward. I feel like combating the white male supremacy that exists in our society and also inside ourselves is a constant struggle. Something to kind of think about, I think, and still think. That's it. Thank you.
I've been learning a bit of politics from an anthropologist lately, and he speaks of how a lot of hierarchy and patriarchy was actually like instilled. I mean, brought upon people through scarcity. You know, like sometimes it's our materialist conditions that require that because some people were already somewhere or whatever. So just I think bringing that abundance back to California and learning about native plants and planting them, I think that could bring the conditions for something that can really be more egalitarian. Because I think even Marx, like his idea was, workers will take control of the factories and we'll have abundance, we'll produce all the right things. So a lot of these theories are about abundance and seeing what the planet and what California is looking like right now. That scarcity will bring more hierarchy and problems like that.
I don't know about you, but I feel like we're not even barely scratching the surface. I mean, I think we came up with more questions than answers, but you know, you want?
A quick one, but I think obviously like relationship building and like bettering yourself and everything is very beautiful, but one thing that really sticks out to me as when we were part of anti-US based struggles in Korea is when hundreds of us would just stack rocks in the middle of the road so the US military could not go on the road. So I think there's something really satisfying about stacking rocks.
Once again, thank you to Midnight Books. Just want to plug an event happening next week relevant to what we were talking about too. John Y. Fernandez, educator, is going to be talking about educational equity here. I'm hoping to attend at 6 p.m. Friday night, right?
The book's right there. Everyone buy the book.
Which book is it? Can you hold it up?
Oh, there, yeah.
All right.
Buy a book.
Okay, and then Midnight Books has a fundraising campaign going on, Ko-Fi.com, Midnight Books, Uptown Whittier, and I'm just plugging a great book, selling like hot cakes. And next month, I'm almost afraid to even say it, we are going to attempt to have a discussion on the Chicano national question. Standing room only potential. And we're gonna say, leave all the weapons on the outside of the door, please. It should be a fun conversation. And finally, in the spirit of continuing these things, a quote from the futurist Alvin Toffler: "If you don't have a strategy, you're part of someone else's strategy." So let's keep putting our heads together and see what we can formulate. Thank you very much. Those are some hard questions, you guys. Those are hard presentations. Have the assignment, the answers by next week.